Hey everybody, welcome to the Remote Real Estate Investor. My name is Michael Album, and today I'm joined by
Tom Schneider.
Emil Shore.
And on today's episode, we're going to be talking about some of the different ways to evaluate properties and determine whether or not it makes sense to purchase them with debt or with all cash. So let's get into it. All right, guys. So Pierre and I were chatting last night, and we were doing some evaluation on different types of properties. And what we were noticing is that some properties are better purchased with debt and others all cash. Have you come across the same thing?
I have. When you actually pointed that out when we were, I think, doing some type of video, like how to analyze a property, and we were looking at different properties, and that came up where I didn't even realize that was a thing really, but you're right in that some properties, the cash on cash debt won't always juice the cash on cash return.
Yeah, I mean, just the return profile can shift quite a bit with leverage. So, obviously, increasing your loan to value ratio would be a more aggressive thing to do. So if there's changes in the value of the home, by having by getting as much debt as possible, there's risk of the value of the home getting to the other side, which would be deemed underwater. And on the actual yield side, depending on how much cash flow you want to make in a month, if you're using all cash to buy, you're going to have much more cash flow, but it's, obviously a higher upfront cost. Gosh, I don't like how I'm using the word obviously all the time. There's some good feedback from Pierre before.
It's not obvious, Tom.
The word obviously, it's not obvious. So, anyways, it's a different return profile, and it depends on your risk tolerance and where you are in your kind of time horizon of if you're planning to, need to live off the cash flow or all that kind of good stuff. So, go ahead, Michael.
Depending on your strategy for investing is often going to dictate what types of properties you want to be looking at, and then also how you want to be purchasing those properties. So for anybody listening to this podcast, we're actually going to be doing, I'm going to be doing a screen share here in a minute and showing some visuals about how I go through the property analysis section and determine whether or not this property is best fit for an all cash purchase or a financed purchase. So for those of you listening at home or listening on the road or not watching the YouTube version of this, the list price is $75,000. The current rent on it is $975 a month. And what I'm going to be doing is walking through just how to evaluate this property, but also how to look at some of the different ways to purchase the property. And what I mean by that is Tom, Emil, and I could all be looking at the exact same property. And depending on how we purchased it, Tom could use all debt, Emil could use 50% financing, and I could use 80% financing with a 20% down payment. The performance of that exact same property with the same income and expenses could look vastly different for the three of us. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to scroll down the page and click on financials. And then I'm going to start playing around with some of the assumptions here. And the first thing I like to do is put the down payment up to 100%, which is significant, or rather indicative of an all cash purchase. And for those of you just listening to this, what our metrics look like now is we have a cap rate of 9.6, a cash on cash return of 8.6, and a monthly cash flow of $545 a month. And again, all I did was change the down payment to be reflective of an all cash purchase. Again, at a $75,000 purchase price with a monthly rent of $975. So next what I'm going to do is whip the down payment slider bar all the way down to 20%. And I'm going to kick our loan interest rate up to 4.5%. Because based on the time of this recording, I think that's fairly reasonable for investment property for somebody with good credit. So now what we see is a cash on cash of 17.3% and a monthly cash flow of $241. So now what I want to start doing is playing with the down payment slider bar as well as the loan interest rate slider bar. And based on my personal experience, what I've seen in the past is that there are loan interest rate breaks at every 5% of additional down payment that you add. So if we slide our down payment slider bar up to 25%, let's drop our loan interest rate down to 4%. And what we see is our cash on cash is actually down at 16.2%, but our monthly cash flow went up to $276. So what we just saw is that we lost a little bit in terms of our metric, in terms of how hard each dollar is working for us, but we generated additional dollars in terms of cash flow. And that makes sense because we took on less debt because we put a bigger down payment, which means we have a smaller mortgage payment, which means we have more free and clear cash flow coming to us each and every month. But what might seem counterintuitive is if you're maximizing or looking to maximize your cash on cash return as a metric, here is an instance where actually taking a higher interest rate gets us better performance. So again, what I did is I reduced the down payment back to its 20%. I kicked our loan interest rate up to 4.5%, and our cash on cash is 17.3, monthly cash flow 241. Then I bring our down payment back up to 25%. I drop our loan interest rate to 4%, and our cash on cash is 16.2, monthly cash flow of 276. So we lost a good 1.1% in terms of our cash on cash metric, and we gained about $35 a month in terms of cash flow. Let's do that again and kick our down payment up to 30%. And this time we'll drop our loan interest rate only 0.25% down to 3 3/4. And now we're down to 15% cash on cash, but our monthly cash flow is up at 302. So again, here's another instance where actually lowering the interest rate that we have on this loan decreases our return metric in terms of cash on cash. Now, it's really, really important to understand this because it's not uniform across every single property. We can't say that, hey, if I get a lower interest rate, that'll actually hurt my cash on cash return. Often that'll help us. But based on this particular property criteria, again, the purchase price, the income and expenses, which we haven't touched, by the way, all we're doing is changing the structuring of the financing. That's what's having these massive impact on the property's performance. Now, let's take another example. Let's kick our down payment back down to 20%. Let's put our loan interest rate back up at 4.5%, but let's change the purchase price of the property and let's make it about $100,000. Now, again, I haven't changed anything else about the property. I haven't changed the income. I haven't changed the expenses. All I've changed is the purchase price. And I want to see if I can't get this property to demonstrate a kind of unique phenomenon. So again, purchase price of $100,600, monthly rent of $975. And by the way, for anybody listening or watching that says there aren't 1% properties out there, here's a prime example. It's listed for, I think, $75,000, rent at $975. That's almost like what, a 1.2, 1.3% property? So let's get back to business here. So if we increase our purchase price to $100,600, our down payment down at 20%, our cash on cash is 9.3% with a monthly cash flow of $174. Now, if I put my down payment up at 100%, again, signifying an all cash purchase, let's see what happens. Our cash on cash drops to 6.8%, but our monthly cash flow jumps up to $582. So again, we're seeing a bit of that inverse relationship here. We are sacrificing in terms of the percentage cash on cash return, but we are generating additional dollars in terms of actual cash flow. So what I'm going to do is same exercise as before. I'm going to drop my down payment all the way down to 20%, which kicks us back to 9.3% cash on cash and 174 in terms of cash flow. And I'm going to incrementally ratchet up the down payment. So now we're at 25%, and I'm going to drop our loan interest rate accordingly to 4%. Now our cash on cash jumps to 9.7%, and our monthly cash flow jumps up to 221. So here is actually the opposite example of the prior example. In the prior example, when it was listed at $75,000 and we dropped our interest rate down to 4%, but increased our down payment to 25%, we actually had a reduction in our cash on cash return, but an increase in monthly cash flow. Here we have both an increase in monthly cash flow and an increase in our cash on cash return. So let's do that again. Let's kick this up to 30% in terms of our down payment, and we'll drop our loan interest rate to 3 3/4. Now our cash on cash is down at 9.5, and our monthly cash flow is up at 255. So again, this example, when we increase the down payment but decrease the loan interest rate, which we would think would help us get a better return, we are actually getting a lesser return in terms of cash on cash. We went down from 9.7 to 9.5%, but our monthly cash flow went up. And again, that's because we are taking on less debt, which means we have a smaller mortgage payment. So if you were trying to optimize this property for performance with regard to cash on cash return as your metric, you would actually be better served putting a lower down payment on the property and paying a higher interest rate, which is very counterintuitive. Oftentimes we think, oh, lower interest rate, that's the best way to go. Not always. So again, this is to demonstrate that it's important to evaluate the property on its specific merits and evaluate each and every property as an individual. It's really difficult to make blanket statements to say, oh, this type of interest rate with this kind of debt is going to be better or worse than this. So again, based on this property specific income and expenses, and based on the purchase price that we've given it at $100,600, we can manipulate the down payment and interest rate in such a way to force the property to behave and to perform in a way that's in line with our buy boxes. And by the way, for anybody listening that's not familiar with what a buy box is, we talk about it all the time in the Roofstock Academy, but it's basically a set of parameters or a framework to work within that helps identify what makes a great investment property for you versus what's just noise. And so whether you're part of the Roofstock Academy, I encourage you to make one. If you're not part of the Academy, definitely encourage you to make a buy box as well. It's really important to get very clear on what your goals are. Because again, Tom, Emil, and I could all be looking at the exact same property. And if Tom buys it with cash, Emil with 50% financing, and I use 20% down, we're going to have vastly different performances. And thus, it could meet Tom's buy box and it could be outside of Emil and mine or vice versa. So again, the debt structuring is hypercritical. And this is a really great way to play around with some different scenarios and determine what's possible, what's feasible, and what might work well for you.
Awesome. Love it.
Yeah, great. I remember you showed this to me months ago. Maybe it was like a year and a half ago. I had no idea that like certain property prices and stuff, like you can actually go negative or in the wrong direction with your cash on cash or yield by putting more debt on the property, which I always thought, more debt, better yield, but not always true.
What I like about this exercise is sometimes you have a certain amount of capital that you want to deploy, right? It seems like a lot of people probably is looking for more capital. You need more capital, but sometimes like I have, I'm just going to make up a number. I have $50,000 that I want to spend, that I want to get to work. And, if you don't need to use that extra debt and you're still getting that same cash on cash return and whatnot, this is a great exercise to, model out, deploying exactly how much money you want to, at these pro forma returns. So I got a good one. So complex is used to refer to the level of components in a system. If a problem is complex, it means it has many components. Complexity does not evoke difficulty. On the other hand, complicated refers to a higher level of difficulty. So this kind of exercise is complex, right? There's various components into it that we're moving these variables to get the kind of return that we want, but it's not complicated. It's not, brain surgery. It's not flying to the moon or something, Anyways, love it. Great exercise, Michael.
Yeah. Well, the other thing to remember too is the complicated part. There's only two variables. It's down payment and interest rate. The end. Once you get to that point, you've already done the hard stuff. You've already figured out what the income and expenses look like on that property. So now you're just figuring out, well, how much money do I put down and what kind of interest rate can I get on it? So I love that, complex versus complicated. That's great. But I encourage everybody to do this exercise on any property they're interested in investing, and even on those that you're not, because what you're going to see is the different levers that you pull and how they affect one another. So play around with different properties, different down payments, different interest rates, see what kind of returns you're able to create. Because I think that's the big thing that separates great investors from good investors is those great investors are able to create and generate their own returns independent of what others say they can or cannot do.
Manifest.
All right, guys, should we get out of here?
That sounds like a good one. Yeah, great one.
Awesome. Well, thanks everybody for tuning in, whether you watched it or listened to it. Hopefully this was helpful. If you like the episode, feel free to give us a rating and review, whatever it is you listen to your podcast. Those are really, really helpful for us. And as always, if you want to hear about something on an episode or have a topic idea, feel free to leave us a comment. And we look forward to seeing you on the next one. Happy investing.
Happy investing.